Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on us. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on us. Melt us, mold us, fill us, use us. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on us. Okay, welcome. Linda's back. Wentworth's are here. It's great.
Hello.
Hi, you made it.
No, barely.
Okay. So, if you all, unless you can, anytime you want to say something, you can unmute yourself. But generally, if someone else is talking, just keep yourself muted so that the video stays on the person that's talking. So we had a lot of reading this week, a lot of stuff, and I might have mentioned before that the way I organized this was sort of spending more time per chapter on the earlier chapters, basically because I figured that's where most of us were living in the earlier stages of this. I could be wrong. So it's way too much to go into every detail. But the other alternative was have us going into like after Easter with this book group, which I wouldn't mind, but I don't know if we could hold on to people that long. So we're into the illuminative stage, known by different names by different authors, sort of the second stage of spiritual growth. And if you once, we talked about the initial stuff where you're sort of coming to, you have your conversion, whether it's a full conversion from not knowing God at all to just like a deeper commitment, but you've made the commitment, you know what you're getting into, you are turning away from sin and growing in knowledge and desire. And so we arrive at this stage. And of course, as was said before, it's not cut and dried, we're back and forth and things at the same time from the different stages. So the first thing to focus on is knowledge, self-knowledge and knowledge of God. And this kind of brings up a thing that has been an issue for me for a long time. And because I think that myself included, most people spiritually, in this sort of position where we need more of a kick in the pants, than coddling in terms of, our lives. And, a lot of this stuff about self-knowledge is realizing, how weak we are, how sinful we are, how we fall short of everything that God has meant us to be. And one of the things that I come up against is there are people, for most people, I think that's something that we need to face, and it's good to bring it up. But there are people who have had really bad childhood and who have had parents who do not, live up to what they're charged with in terms of loving their children. And people are brought up to feel that they're garbage. People have a lot of issues from their abuse of their childhood. And so when you start talking about this thing, it sort of triggers this whole association with, and then part of their recovery from that is being affirmed and how good they are and everything. So it sort of goes against that. You say, well, how do you reach that? How do you approach this subject with somebody like that? And, I think that this chapter really sort of covers it. It's if you can get people to sort of stay on that long for it, we are weak, we're unworthy, we're sinners, we haven't lived up to our potential. But if you think about somebody, who his parents have been saying like, you're no good, you're unlovable. That's the one thing that is absolutely not true, that we're unlovable, because that's what we were made for. We were made to be loved by God and to love God. And so whether you have been taught that, or however you've been raised, one of the things we never talk about ourselves, the self-knowledge is basically unbearable for anybody without the knowledge of God, because the knowledge of God is that God loves us, and that God is the one who gives us the grace to be whole, to be true. We were made to love God. And so if you're just talking about yourself, isolated from God, that's bad for anybody. So we're all in the same boat that way. It's tragic that people have to deal with those kind of issues with their self-image and things. But the only way, I think the best way to solve that is to be with everybody else and saying, we need God, we need the love of God. And I might have told this story before. Went to Father Nado for confession one time. Actually, I was just asking him a question. I said, like, I had committed some sin, that there was somebody who needed help, and I was too busy. I didn't help them. So I go to confession. I confess my sin, and I said, well, all things are great with me, but that guy still didn't get any help, and I can't fix that. And he says, well, I said, like, every sin has consequences, and, you get forgiven, but it doesn't change those consequences. And he said, well, you know the repercussions of sin, but you're not thinking about the repercussions of mercy. And the fact that, what is the fact that you've been forgiven? How does that ripple out into the world? And how does that affect other people? And that God has shown you mercy. And so, when that happens, whether it's God showing you mercy, you show someone else mercy or kindness, that ripples out as well. So you can't just say one side and say, well, that's wrong. So, as we look at ourselves and we get that's the thing. I think that for me, if I didn't have God, if I didn't have a knowledge of God's love, I wouldn't be able to just look at myself honestly and say like, oh, well, I'm pretty good, I'm better than that guy. That's sort of a lot of people sort of base their morality on, well, I never killed anybody, that's sort of a low bar, But it would be very hard to feel good about yourself, because there's no power to change, or there's no forgiveness. So I think that knowing the love of God, and knowing that God, he knows everything about us. He knows even more than we do ourselves what our weaknesses are, but he also knows, what our abilities are. And so there's you can't have one without the other, because you'd really despair if you really sat down and sort of looked at all your failings and faults. And even if they're not failings or faults, just your ability to do anything in the world, is pretty limited. But with the trust of God, I like to think of sort of a analogy. If you think about a light bulb, and a light bulb is a great thing. It lights up the room, you turn it on, and there's light everywhere. It's just like daytime. Amazing invention. So but if you just take a light bulb, hold in your hand, you're looking at it, it looks nice, but it's not doing anything. Like, I could bring 100 light bulbs into your house. If you don't have electricity, then nothing's going to happen. Those light bulbs are useless. They're, there's nothing to do with them. And so I think of God as the electricity. We're all these light bulbs that are so great and able to do this amazing stuff, but not by ourselves, not without that electricity. So that's not copyrighted. You can use that anywhere. probably so other people have used it already. But so that's kind of the way I look at it. That we can't, and they say that in the book, is there's no, you can't just look at your self-knowledge is part of growing close to God. And of course, as we see throughout this, it's all, everything is up to God, and everything comes from God and goes to God, and that's not a bad thing. So as we grow in, our knowledge of God and our knowledge of ourselves, we, start to realize that, what it is that God wants of us, and who God is, and arrive at the, the idea we're created in the image of likeness of God, but, God is literally dying. He died to give us the grace to restore that image, and if we think about that, we're going to possess the all-important virtue of humility. And another thing that I like to think of is sometimes we have this image of, we have Jesus who came as a little baby, and he lived a human life, and he had suffered and died, unjustly, all these things. And then we had to he was so humble. Jesus was just this image of humility. But then, like the second coming, he's going to come really kick butt. That's when he's going to come down and really set people straight. Or the God the Father is this big, mean guy up there. God is humble. God the Father, the whole God is humble. And you think about it, he has nothing to prove to anybody. God doesn't have to, he doesn't have any doubts about who he is. Everything is his. So if you're, our pride and all our sins against humility are us trying to be more than we are. And God can never do that. He's everything. So it doesn't make any sense for him to be anything but humble. So when we're humble, we'll not presume any merit or ability on our own, but with full confidence, we beg God to make us holy. So it says that progress in holiness is not only possible, but necessary. And then they talk about the importance of desire, and how, the saints all, had this great desire for God, and how important it is that that you want that you want to please God, that you want to be holy. And I really think this was a big thing for me to, I said it before, to realize that if you don't have that desire, it's like, just to realize, like, well, I'm not like those saints, I don't see myself pining away for God like that. If you don't have the desire, ask for it. That's what they say. And for even, it doesn't matter if it's some lukewarm person or the greatest saint that we're reading about here, their desire was a gift from God. It all came from God anyway. It's not like that they were any different from us, and except that God gave them that gift. So if you ask for that gift, God will give you that gift, that desire, and we could all use, a boost in our desire for God. So then they go on to talk about detachment from created things, from creatures, and as we're talking about all these things, let me get the book out here. Shuffling my notes, I'm sorry. But they talk about the various things that we can be attached to: money and possessions, our sensual pleasures and sexual pleasure, and our reputation and things like that. And one of the things you notice is all these things that they're talking about they're not saying these are bad things, like, all these are awful things that we need to, and those have been heresies throughout history, where they say that, that pleasure is bad, and that sex is bad, and these things are evil. They're just things that are there that God made for us. But if we become attached to them, then they become like an obstacle to God. They become idols almost, you know. And you know, it's easy to say, "Oh, I don't have any attachments," and they say like, "Oh, if you want to find out if you're attached to something, you know, try to see what happens when you lose it. How do you feel? You know, if you're really upset and really, you know, bummed out, you know, so I'm not really materialistic, you know, oh, I'm not that attached to things." Uh, and then like all of a sudden you know, your car breaks down and you're like, oh my gosh, you know, you know, I have this little thing like this keyboard that you can't see, but I've been playing. I was telling Dorothy, it's like this, I never had so much pleasure in a material thing before. This is just a great keyboard. You know, it's got this great sound, the response to it is like, but you know, for the most part, you know, material, I'm not materialistic, but then I look around, all these things I have, you know, so it's something that we're always like everything else. You could always be better, you know. Those and this people in this group, some are more materialistic than others, I'm sure, but we can all grow in that. And but it's also some of these things like your pride that you're attached to, or your reputation, or even your health. You know, sometimes you could be, uh, you know, and that's it's pretty natural to be, you know, like I'm healthy, so I'm, you know, I'm very thankful for that. But when I get sick, you know, I'm not always like the happiest camper, you know. So it's and you know, a lot of these things that they say, like I feel like if I was to tell somebody, you know, oh, you're sick, you should be happy though, you know, that's kind of it's not my place to say it, you know. They're unreasonable things, really, in a way. But what God is calling us is to a greater that detachment that gives us room for God. That gives us and actually what we're talking about. The chapter is called "Growing in Freedom." So if you can actually be detached even from something as basic to you as your health, like take it or leave it, you know, then you are really a free person. You know, nothing's going to get you down. You know, you think about somebody who's got so much, you know, somebody's a billionaire or something. I remember it was a guy I knew that had a lot of money, and he came, I saw him one time and he was really down, and, you know, what's going on? Well, I think it was 2008. There was a lot of big, you know, everything was going down the tubes. So he had a lot of stock that he had lost, you know, and he was, you know, very sad about that. And, you know, but he got over it. He still had a lot of other things. And one thing that we will never have taken away from us is the love of God. So that's what we're counting on. So along with becoming detached from these material things or these created things, even people, we'll talk a little bit later about that, the different types of loves that we have. We're becoming more attached to the things of God, to the virtues. So we're seeking to be like God. And the big ones they talk about here are humility and patience. And so to be humble is to really to be like God. And it's not always just saying, oh, I'm just a terrible person. I knew somebody once who was just so down on herself, but this was a very self-centered person. It wasn't like she was because she only focused on herself and how awful she was. And, you know, she was unable to really open up to other people and to God. So that's not really what humility is. Humility is seeing that they're weak, you know, that we're dependent on God. And so there's lots of opportunities, you know, if you think about it. Well, there was a little meme on the internet about, you know, something about when people park too close and you can't even get out of your car. And then people were saying, well, you know, if you let the air out of the tires on the other side, the car will lean over, you know, and all these, you know, bend their mirrors in. And I was like, well, you know, the way people are today, is it really worth getting shot over? You know, it's going to come out and, you know, you get an altercation. But like something like that, you can be very angry about, or you can be okay with it, or they say you can be cheerful about it, Oh, someone gave me an opportunity to accept an injustice or a wrong without, without complaining. And so those are the opportunities we have. And, they mentioned a little bit about you want to be patient. Sometimes we say, oh, I want to be patient. You want to be known as a patient person. Like, some of my, piano students, the parents like, oh, you're so patient with the kids, And I'm like, well, it's my job. I'm getting paid, But then you're like, if you have to deal with somebody that, is really giving you a hard time, and you're like, you're rising above that person. Oh, there's somebody who is being a jerk, and I've never been a jerk in my life, So, but then you got to think about that too. So anyway, that's just a little bit about that. So as we're, we're looking for opportunities now, and, to the world, a lot of this stuff is just crazy. Somebody slights you, or somebody gives you a hard time, or, commits some injustice. What do? You take it. You try to be nice to that person. You try to be humble. And that just is not the way of the world, But that's how we're growing into the image of God, and that's how we're growing closer to God, and we're growing closer to the fulfillment of all desire. So we have time, I would say 15 minutes. We can break into our groups, and I'm going to give you, I hope I can do this, the questions. So here we have question number 1. How free are you? Have you been able to experience detachment from created things as a positive experience? And the second question is, have you met humiliating circumstances with rancor, patience, or cheerfulness? And maybe different situations have brought forth different reactions, but maybe you could think about situations you've been in, and maybe how you have changed over time in some of your reactions to that. So we're gonna, and you can discuss, you don't like those questions, you can discuss other things too, because there was a lot in those chapters there. So if everybody's ready, we will be whisked off into other rooms.
Hello.
Hey.
Hello.
Go.
All right.
Abracadabra.
Make it bigger. I don't know what happened. There.
Oh.
Everybody
Nope,
made
there
it
they
back.
are.
I know who I was with.
Who were you with, Diane?
I was with the Wentworths, but I have to say I was by myself for like, well, less than a minute, felt longer. And I thought, oh, I lost everybody. So I guess I'll just contemplate on these questions by myself.
Just ask yourself.
But they popped up.
All right. Well, Diane, why don't you go first? Everybody else can.
So you're putting me on the spot now.
Well,
Okay.
now you can talk about what you talk to yourself about, and what you talk to them about.
I'm going to try to show some, try to be humble with this. No, this I don't want to speak for Charlie and Bridget. I'll say a few things and then certainly let them speak as well. But these were really big questions. These were really broad questions. It was just like so huge. And I wish I had a list of all the words from the chapters to pinpoint what some of the freedoms might be, because there's just so much information. But Charlie was basically saying that some things he's more free from and others he's not as open-minded or as free to them, perhaps. And with Bridget, it wasn't so much the things that we can see and touch, but what can I get done in a day, or things that she can't really control, but that take over that she feels maybe might not be a freedom as well. And then on the second question, we talked about, with Bridget, it depends on the situation. And Charlie said that it's harder for him with people he knows, for example, maybe family, than for a complete stranger if he's put in a situation. And then we talked a lot about, I had brought up the criticism, how I feel I've evolved because I grew up in a very stern family. And so as I was growing into adulthood, any criticisms that came, which could have been considered constructive criticism, was a little defensive on my end. And but then for me, just to finish, I think the overall thing with all of this is I honestly think God has a sense of humor, and he puts us in situations that provides us to test how humble we're going to be or how we're going to handle whatever. And so Charlie and Bridget can add to this.
I really don't know how much more we have to add. That was a pretty good summary of what we talked about.
Thank you, Diane.
You're welcome.
God bless you.
Well, we had to find each other at first, so that took us a couple of minutes, but.
That's right.
Great. So let's see, Deb, who were you with? I know you were with Andy.
It's Suzanne. There she is.
So how'd it go?
Good.
Maybe we should get Suzanne to
I
talk
think
about it.
we had a really good discussion. I mean, obviously, the questions were big questions, but I think that we shared quite a bit, the three of us. Would you agree with that, Andy and Debbie?
Well, so you have to unmute.
Why are we unmuted?
Well, I'm muted now. We're on. See? So we did share. We shared about the different things what we're free from, the attachments, and interesting. Mine is similar, I think, to Bridget's. Attached to achievement, getting anxious when I don't get certain things done, and like that stress. There's no freedom in that. So God, the electricity going through the light bulb, that's where it's coming from. But sometimes I get caught up in my own stuff. So not so much a thing as that. Andrew was money, attachment to money, but also thinking sometimes he's less attached in that he gives some money away and feels that it's helpful to tithe and such. Different attachments we have.
Yeah, and I brought up I thought it was interesting how you brought up about attachments to health. Having a sense of detachment on, especially if you have health issues, sometimes you come from a mindset of thinking, well, if I do A plus B plus C plus D, then I'll get this result. And, you get yourself in trouble for sure. And instead of having a sense of trust and allowing the Lord to be the one to be, trusting that where you're at in that period of time of your life is where you need to be. And maybe that's a time of where you really learn about humility, and detachment and all those, things that help us become closer to him. So.
Great.
And I think we did talk, we did talk about humiliating or embarrassing situations. We had at first a hard time trying to remember times, but then we finally did come up with some general instances of realizing that pride was really a big component in any of those types of situations, whether they're something that somebody does to us or that, we have done something that we have done and that somebody called us on.
Great. Thank you. Okay. How about Linda? Who were you with?
Oh, I was with Jennifer and Rose, and
started off talking about Jennifer. I don't really want to speak for you, okay? Because Jennifer had a little different take, but the how free from detachment, right? I just mentioned that, in my late 30s and 40s, I had a lot of real heavy losses in my family and friends, and people dying, and so that kind of gives you a real wake-up call to what's really important, and that life is, and my conclusion is that life is all about relationship, and so whatever thing can get in the way, forget it. It doesn't. Nothing trumps relationships, and then if that's the case, then as far as getting to know God, if you don't try to get to know him here while you're here, why would you want to spend eternity with him? So so that was my take on that first question. The humiliating circumstance, I don't think I even touched on that. I don't remember. But then Rose and we were all over the map, weren't we? So I'm gonna let Jennifer say something now, and then she can hand off to Rose.
I don't really have a lot to say. I think we agreed that dealing with humiliation, a lot of it was just having a good sense of humor. Because if you can laugh at yourself and see a situation as funny as it is, then it's pretty hard to have bad feelings about it. So I think, but you can't always do that. As Linda said, sometimes things seem really black and white to you, and you can't be in a place like that. And I think the one thing I said is that I think in the last few years, I've had a lot of things, a lot of trials and tribulations. And I think that has taught me humility, because it's taught me humility because I've lost things that I didn't even realize were a blessing. I was too busy with life to really focus on how great what I had was. And then I think too, when you can have some pride in where you are, what you think you've accomplished. And when you lose all that, you realize it really wasn't about you at all. It was a gift from God, which is a very good deterrent to pride, I guess. So as hard as sometimes things can be, I guess they bring us closer to God, because they make us understand the need for detachment and the fact that we really don't, anything we have could disappear tomorrow.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Jen. Anything you wanted to add to that, Rose? Or
I was muted. Yeah, no, that was good.
all right. Thank you. All right. So, I guess it leaves me and Kate, right? All right. I do a lot of talking. Kate, you can talk.
Okay. Well, on the attachment to things, I think actually Dan and I both had kind of similar stories to illustrate our attachment and how good we were with not being attached to things. When I was in Germany, I bought myself a BMW X5. Loved that ride. Week after I bought it, I got distracted coming out of my garage. Got a 6-inch long, 1/2-inch wide strip of the bumper came right off. And it's like, oh no. But you know what? I kept that car for 10 years. I did that probably 3 more times, had other, it's a car. And Dan, were you in high school or college? College. And bought himself this new bike, motorcycle. Loved the motorcycle. 2 weeks after he got it, he crashed, and God's kind of, I think, telling you, yeah, that stuff's great, but other things are more important, like you said. Now, on the humiliation, I have to say, something Susan said I thought was interesting, that they had a hard time thinking of something. Because as Dan and I were talking, I realized that I didn't have a hard time. I could come up with probably, 5 things right up the top of my head that were humiliating. And I wondered to myself, what does it mean that I still remember those? But a lot of those, I remember those and I laugh. I had one I didn't even tell it to Dan, that it happened, and immediately I was telling folks because I thought it was hilarious. I actually got locked in a bathroom once when I was temporarily deployed to Maelstrom Air Force Base, and had to lean out the window and get somebody to go down to the billeting office and have them let me back in. And I told this to one of my lieutenants. I was a captain at the time. I told it to one of my lieutenants, and he said, "I would never tell anybody that." I said, "Why not? It's hilarious." So I think as I've gotten better with humiliation, and Dan had a great example where there was a change in leadership, and a lot of the stuff that he had accomplished in his work was basically disregarded. And he said, he had a hard time with that, but with the help of God came to let it go and help this person who had come in to do their job. And he says, I'm fine now. So I think you can, from our examples, it's like, it's so much better if you just let it go, laugh at it, that cheerfulness. I would say most of the time I'm not cheerful with humiliation, but when I can be, it's so much better. So I think that cover it, Dan?
Yeah, I think so. One thing that came to me, Jen and I have both parents of 20-year-olds, and that's really good for your humility, to have someone who's always reminding you how stupid you are, and, how much more they know than you do. So that's a good example. So great. We're going to move on to growing in love. And I really thought it was beautiful, as you go through the book, and you see all these things, and some of them seem kind of negative, humiliation and patience with all this stuff. But love is what cures it all. Love what makes it all work. If you have love, I'm talking about these 20-year-olds. I mean, if it was some guy on the street, that would be a lot, but these are our kids who we love, and so that I think I see this sort of like things sort of weaving in and out, that they all connect. It's the motivation for why we do these things. If you're just trying to accomplish something by putting up with humiliation or detaching yourself from all these things that you really care about, it's just a pretty pitiful thing. But if you're doing it out of love, that's a beautiful thing, and that's what it's all about. And so, they talk about these 3 stages of love, which are really the 3 stages of the spiritual development that they're talking about. As you start out with you love God because you're afraid not to. God is all powerful, and you're in need of Him, and and I think with Saint Bernard talks about being kissing the feet of Christ, and then moving up to the side, and then the mouth being the purest love. So as you're moving from this different kinds of love of God, first you're really afraid, and then you're still thinking about yourself. It's not so much self-preservation, you don't want to go to hell, but you're thinking about how great it is to be, a follower of Jesus, or, to be loved by God, and, how good that is for you. And I kind of reminds me of when I was in high school, and, I think a lot of the difficulty in my spiritual life has come from sort of this stage where I first became, growing into an adult, that a lot of church was all about making it attractive to the younger generation or whatever. And, so we had all this music that people would like and these programs, and everything was different. And nobody talked about humiliation or anything like that, and I can remember, people talking about, oh, the high that God gives you is better than any high from drugs and stuff, and so it's sort of like it was sort of a lot of what you based your thinking on was what does the world want to see, like an advertisement almost. And that is sort of a different take, and it sort of blocks out some of these harder things that are really beautiful, and I kind of forgot where I was going with that point, but anyway. So you're moving through these different stages of love, and we come to the idea of love of neighbor, and these things, Jesus made it very clear that they're not two things. They're the one and the same thing. You can't love God and hate your neighbor. And you can't, those two commandments are sort of interlinked. And, the Apostle John says, if you hate other people, you can't love God. You can't do both. It's not possible. And so when we're talking about this love we have for God and striving towards this perfect, selfless love that's really only about the other and it's not about ourself, totally lack of self-interest, that applies to God, but also applies to other people. And, and of course, it's always a sort of balancing act in the world, because you can't trust everybody, with everything. You can't just go out into the world and just say, here's my credit card, I love you, whatever. So you have to be careful, but we're always trying to push the envelope on that. And whoever we encounter, a lot of times we try to think of, when we think about these things, we think of like politically, or like some big thing that encompasses the whole world. But really, we're responsible for our own sphere, the people that we meet and the people that we know and our relationships, and how are we loving those particular people, because God put those people there for us to love. And it sort of mentions that in the book, that, God is working in the world through all these individual people interacting with other people. So we don't have to fix everything in the world, but we're responsible for loving the people in our life, the people that are close to us in our family, the people that are our friends, but also our enemies, the people who are not good to us, people we don't like. And that, I think, that goes both ways. When you can really do something good for someone else who is not good to you and change them in a way, but it also changes you, and it gets you less attached to yourself. It's almost like making an idol of yourself. Like, that person's not going to get away with that. They're not going to be able to do that to me. But if you say, well, yes, they are, because all we need to do is look at Jesus on the cross, and well, are we better than him? Is this more of an injustice than that? Whatever anybody's trying to do to you. So they talk about the different kinds of love that you could have for our neighbor. So I thought that was a really great thing, and I sort of reminds me of this whole group. I wasn't really thinking about it, but it's been such a benefit to me to have the experience of all these of you people. Each of you have God in your life and what's going on with you, and that's such a benefit to my spiritual life, to have this kind of a talk about what's going on in your lives. And so I think that's our relationship with other people is very important. It's not all just me and God kind of vertical thing. And it's an interesting thing about how to tell if your love is selfish. So, they have these different, I think it was St. Francis de Sales talks about, when some people talk about how much they like this guy because, he's so handsome and he's, he's a good dancer and stuff like that. It's all very superficial, sensual attraction, they call it. And so a lot of times you think, well, if you're loving somebody, how is it, am I being selfish in this love, or and the whole thing comes down to how does it, is it a possessive thing? Like if that person loves somebody else or is close to somebody else, is that going to make you angry or upset or, feel insecure, and being possessive? Like, that how much is it about you really is the question, in your friendships or in your other relationships. And then it also mentions how, flirtatious relationships can lead to immorality. And it sort of struck me as I was reading through this stuff, a lot of this stuff about love, that in the world we live in today, some of the people, people who are not a part of of the church or believe in God or Christians might think this is crazy because they just, hook up with anybody, like people today, some of these ideas just seem kind of, out of step, but this is truly, about our human dignity and how, we are to relate to each other. And this is, really the truth. So, and he talks about how to be careful. Most of us are older and married, but of course, if you're married, it's even more important that you're outside your marriage, your relationships are very pure. Then it talks about friendships and godly friendships. And one of the things I thought was interesting is that you should never embark on something like this without a spiritual director of some kind. You're not just going to be like, say, okay, I'm going to become holy, I'm going to, start praying and I'm going to be the holiest guy. And I forget which one of the writers was saying that some people do that and they get off on these things, and then they start teaching other people like, hey, look what the holiness I achieved, and I'm really holy, so I'm going to start teaching other people, and it's a total disaster, So, but if it's hard to find a good spiritual director sometimes, and so, he talked about having spiritual friendship. So it's just somebody who is not necessarily that experienced, but somebody who's committed to the same journey. And that's kind of what we're doing here, to sort of keep ourselves on the right track and just sort of, bounce things off each other. And, I think it's a real blessing to have that. And, I never kind of realized how important that was until quite recently, that you do. I always knew you needed some kind of spiritual direction, and I didn't really have that, and now I feel like I do, and I feel like it's really beautiful thing. One of the things that they mention is in none of us are in a religious community, so it's not really applicable. But he felt that the idea of everybody living together in this religious community, you didn't need to have a special relationship with one person, and that could be bad for the community if you were, just having that special spiritual friendship with one person, and that's what the whole community, living in community, is about. I thought it was interesting. This is something that probably comes up with people who get serious about their spirituality, that St. Augustine talked about this apatheia, which was an idea in philosophy at the time, where a Stoic philosophy, where you didn't have any, your detachment meant that, you didn't care about anything or anybody, like if somebody, you had a friend and they were helpful to you and you were all about God, and then that guy died, you'd be just like, well, he died, I don't care, you would have no emotion about it. And that obviously is not what, it's not human, really. It's not and Jesus becoming human, blessed our humanity and lived that. He talks about when Lazarus died, that, Jesus was the resurrection and the life, and he knew Lazarus was going to be raised, and yet he still wept. Jesus wept for that terrible thing that happened, and he was very sad about losing his friend that way and about death itself. So you know, the fact that people mean something to us is not a weakness in our faith. You know, that we're there's attachment, like we talked about. When we talk about attachments, we're talking about ourselves, like being, you know, putting our own interests above other people, even when we think, oh, it's because I love this person. Well, it's because that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, you genuinely value a person in your life, of course you're going to care about what happens to them, and, you know, be involved, and, you know, it's going to be a part of you. It's going to be, and that's not a weakness at all. That's a beautiful thing, and that's part of being a Christian. That's what God says, to love our neighbor, and that's what it is. It's really taking, having stock in what happens to other people. And if we can extend that beyond our family and friends and to people around the world, and even people who might want to do us harm, that makes us even more Christ-like and loving the way God loves.
And if I could just chime in, this, as you were talking there, it reminds me of the way that Bishop Barron describes that. He talks about true love for an individual as being willing the good of the other as other, which is, the grammar always freaks me out there a little bit, but basically saying that, you know, I wish the best for another person, even if there's no payback for me, you know, it's just that I will the good of the other, and without any expectation of a return or benefit. So as you were talking there, just Barron was ringing in my ears.
Yeah, exactly. That's what, that's our goal. And, you know, like anything else, you might realize that, oh, I'm not there yet. You know, so how can I deal with that? How can I make myself better than that? And they go on to talk about married love, and you know, that there have been heresies and different people talking about marriage as not part of, you know, a Christian life. And there's definitely, we think about just Jesus' first miracle was at a wedding in Cana, and you know, blessing that, and how important it is. And St. Paul going on to say that it's really a image or a symbol of Christ's love for the church. And of course, it goes the other way, that Christ's love for the church is how we are to love our spouses. And it also talks about, again, this is something I thought was interesting, that a lot of, like Saint Bernard and some of these other saints from a long time ago were talking about how important it is that there's affection and love and real tenderness in marriage. And, you know, this is at a time when there were arranged marriages for some of the, you know, some of these saints lived in those times where, you know, until fairly recently, you know, marriage was kind of like a contract, and you know, it wasn't always a romantic thing that, you know, people were really that happy about. It was a beautiful, I don't know if anybody's seen probably have seen the nativity story that came out a few years ago about Mary and Joseph and the birth of Jesus. And of course that was an arranged marriage. You know, just Joseph came over, and Mary's father said, "You're going to marry Joseph," and didn't ask how you feel about that. And she wasn't happy about it, you know, in that scene. But as they go through all the stuff that they have to go through, you know, they become much closer. And, you know, so even in that situation where, you know, Mary had never wanted to be married, and in that situation, you could see that the love developed, and the love was a very important part of that. So I think that's a real beautiful thing. And again, this is something that might be a little disturbing in our modern times to some people, that, you know, the sexuality and the physical part of marriage, that even, you know, sometimes we think, well, hey, you're married, you know, anything goes, you know, it's like a free license. But you can also develop an inordinate attachment to sexuality even in marriage, and they go into that. And he sort of compares it to eating, you know, like it has a beautiful purpose in marriage, just like eating has a purpose, other than, and it's not just for nutrition. When you eat, it's part of, you know, of eating with other people, and it's part of being a community or living in a family. But if you're just eating for the sake of the pleasure of eating, then there's something wrong there, and that sort of applies to sexuality, even in marriage. And I think I remember John Paul II said something like that and got into big hot water, like, "Oh, what are you talking about?" But I just would like to just read this final quote from that chapter. Oh, my little bookmark just fell out. That I think sort of sums it up. And this is from Francis de Sales. And he says, "See the crowded ranks of the married who live so calmly together in mutual respect, which cannot be had without great charity. See how these devout souls wed care of the exterior house to that of the interior, that is, the love of their earthly spouse with that of the heavenly spouse. Look upon the eyes of the Savior who comforts them, and see how all of them together aspire to him. The crucified King calls you by name. Come, my well-beloved, come, that I may crown you." So that's sort of the ideal. And I know that, some of us are married, some of us aren't, and some of us are somewhere in between. And some of us have spouses, we mentioned, that are not, really on this same spiritual journey, but that we can love them. Our love, as St. Paul says, you never know what your love for that person is doing. That might be the thing that gets them to heaven. So it's all about love. And I was going to, we're running out of time, but I was going to mention about the different types of love, like the different translations of that word, because like in our modern society, I think if you're listening to music or watching movies, it just means sex, that's what people say. But obviously we're not talking about that. So I have one question to discuss. Oh, look how late it is. Oh my gosh, I shouldn't talk so much. But maybe we could just talk about this right here together, all of us, if it doesn't get too rowdy. Where is it? Oh, there. So the question is, how can our love for God help us to grow in love of our neighbor, and vice versa? How can our love for our neighbor help us to grow in love for God? And maybe we could just each person here, just maybe we could talk about that as a group instead of going to small groups and coming back, since we're a little low on time. What do you think? All right, so I'm going to take the screen sharing off. So the question, once more time, how can our love for God help us to grow in love of our neighbor, and vice versa? So now I can see everybody again. And just chime in anytime.
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is, if God can be patient with me, loving, patient, give me opportunities, forgiving, all of why we love God, then why would we not want the same of others? So in exchange, in a relationship, whether it's my husband or my family, I would want to espouse that on them, just like God does for me. I guess is the first thing that comes to my mind. Am I making any sense? Or
Oh yeah, that's beautiful.
So that has taken time and evolved, but that's how I stop myself and reflect on how I should be to others.
Thank you. That's great. Anybody else?
I just want to say that God shows us the way. He's the example. And, everything he tells us is to love one another and treat each other. All the scripture tells us. It's kind of the guidebook for the whole thing, So it's just like a full circle kind of a thing.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess like are, that was really beautiful what you said, Diane. And I think that maybe like on the other, we talk about the other way around, how can our love for our neighbor help us grow in our love for God? What might be some, anybody have any thoughts on that?
The one thing that I don't have it fully formulated yet, but when you show love for a neighbor, whether it be your actual neighbor or somebody who's in need, and I was a hospice volunteer for a while, and when you extend this sort of love for them in their state, and they look back with you with a particular look, it's hard to describe, but just in their eyes, you see how appreciative they are. And I guess God would be so appreciative if we extended love to him in much the same way, because we're created in the image of God.
Mm.
It's interesting that you mentioned that kind of thing, because I was kind of thinking of some of the volunteering I do, and on the one hand, you do that and you think about, whatsoever you do for the least of my brothers, that you do unto me. And you think of them as the least of my brothers, but also you're supposed to see God in them, and I think that's the important thing. And maybe that's how doing that kind of thing, that kind of volunteering, helps you grow in love for God, because you should be seeing God in anybody. And sometimes it's hard. And I think maybe that's when it helps the most, when you're thinking, it's like, okay, can we step it up? Or, do you really need to take so much? Or, it's like, you don't know this person, you don't know their story. And so, like I said, I think that's when it's hardest. I think maybe that's when it even helps us the most.
I think that when we love many different kinds of people, we love God better, because God is every one of those people. God is infinite. He has infinite possibilities, infinite personalities. So when you love people who are different from you, or somebody who's very hard to love, that gives you insight into God and makes you better at loving God. If that makes sense.
Mm.
That's beautiful. Yes, definitely. Linda, look,
I
you
think
look
that,
like you said
I
something.
think that when you love someone, you want to do for them. And I think that it's just a natural progression. I mean, you love your family, so you do for them. You do small things for them. And I think that the same goes for neighbors. Is when you love, it just naturally flows that you're going to do for them. And it's a wonderful demonstration. You don't always have to do things, and just being with someone is loving them too. Just being present to people is loving them as well. But yeah, and that's how you love your neighbor, and that's how you love God too. You just be with him, just spending time. So
Well, thank you. That is beautiful. That's wonderful. Any other thoughts from anyone? Well, I'm glad that that we're recording these, and it's up on YouTube. All these sessions are up on YouTube, and I just feel like it's just such a wealth of wisdom and just great, just God is working in everybody's life, and things that I wouldn't have thought of. It's great to hear from everybody, and that's just such a beautiful thing. So I'm very grateful to you all for being here and being part of this. And it's on YouTube. Somebody in Malaysia could be watching that. get something out of it. Someone on the
So
other
Dan,
side.
I'll just let you know, I know at least one person in Holy Redeemer who's picking up on your YouTube videos.
Great.
And the address will be published in the February 14th bulletin. So if you can't find it, the address will be in there. You just type it in, you'll find it.
Okay, good. Yep. And, if you wanted to catch up on, as we're going along, you're probably going to reread this book at some point, and hopefully that'll always be up there, and you can look back on this time together. So, well, thank you very much. We're going to close. If nobody has anything else they want to add to that, don't want to cut anybody off. And we'll meet next week. And I believe we're going to be covering the next 3 chapters, these big fat chapters. So we have growing in prayer, help from heaven, and a deeper purification. So who knows what wonders are in store for us as we explore this together. So why don't we close with the Our Father, in the name of the Father, of the Son, of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Okay. Everyone want to unmute and say goodnight?
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank
See you
you.
next week.
See you next
Good
week.
night.